Welcome back to Marketing Mondays Mastery. And today I thought we would kind of switch it up and do something with writing. I know it's one of those things that is so important in all of our positions and jobs, whether it's marketing or PR or even just running a business. And we all know that writing can be a bit of a daunting task. I mean, how many of us can feel ever so slightly panic stricken when someone's like, "Oh, I need you to put together the short description of your business," or "I need, just a little write up about your offering because we want to feature you." And you're like, "Oh, it's so exciting." But then you're like, "Where do I start? Like, I know this, I know it from front to back, past to present. I put it all together. But when it's time to actually write it, sometimes we draw a blank." And so I don't even consider myself necessarily a professional writer, but I definitely feel like I get writer's block sometimes. So today we're going to guide you through some tips that will help you get started without the anxiety or stress related to writing. We'll also include some tips so that it just gets easier and more efficient moving forward. So let's get started. As far as your host, I am PJ Warchansky. I am a full-time communication director at Appalachian State University in Boone. I also have the pleasure of being the PR manager for Uplift and help with some of the marketing programming, and have recently started adjunct teaching at App State as well. And then our co-host, Miss Kara Treadway, who's not able to join us today, but she will be back soon, is always part of the team and is just an amazing asset to Uplift. So let's look at today's blueprint as far as writing with impact. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is defining your purpose. Like, why are we writing? And then as far as like breaking down the who, like who are we writing to, what are we writing about, where, when, how, all of those important details. And then of course the audience, who are we writing to? So understanding your audience, identifying your target audience for this specific piece, whether you use high or low context communication, if there's cultural relevance, think about your audience's lived experiences, and then making sure that it aligns with your culture, your goals, and your reputation. And then we'll get into 3 tips for writing with impact and ensuring that your writing is understandable, engaging, relevant, and then making sure it's actionable. And then we'll break down some effective communication strategies. This is where we're going to define strategic communication because that's so important in a lot of the things that we do. And then we'll discuss some of the foundations of effective communication. And then breaking tradition for creativity. I always love thinking about, how do we become more creative? I feel like for many, many years, I just was under the impression that I'm not a creative person. But then I started kind of going through some processes of trying to be more creative. And I realized that I think most of us have a creative side. And for those of us that are already creative, it's just going to come a little bit easier. But with writing, I believe it comes with an opportunity to showcase our creativity. And then we'll go through some actionable writing strategies. We'll deep dive into some things that you can do right now. And then some tips for finding your voice. We'll look at just some simple things that have helped professional writers, and then how to write right, which is really important. Sometimes it's just simple things that we forget. So we just want to go through some of the basics there. And then we'll regroup. We'll go through some key takeaways, and then we'll allow some time for any questions, discussion. And so let's jump in. All right. So step 1, define your purpose. This is where we talk about the why. Why are we writing? Is it for a press release? Is it internal communication notification? Is it for social media? Are we writing an ad? Or is it a script? Are we doing a speech? So why? This is the most important element for writing with impact. And then you want to align your purpose with your message. And then think about your goals and objectives, especially from a business standpoint. If you own your own business, or if you're representing someone that owns your own business, this is where you bring in those objectives, those business goals, to make sure that aligns with your message. And if it doesn't, if there's a misalignment there, then you might have to rethink that purpose. Next, who is your audience? Think about who we want to reach. Is there a core audience? Is it a new audience that we haven't reached in the past? Is it distant stakeholders? Maybe think indirect customers. So, for example, if I'm buying my wife and this is me being a good husband, I know she likes massages. So if I buy her a gift certificate to this local spa here in Boone, I'm not necessarily a direct customer, but I'm more distant or indirect. But it also could be maybe shareholders or community members or leaders, employees. So think about who that is. And then next, what format? So this is where we define the format. Is it a script for a radio ad? Is it a press release? Is it a social media post with maybe a little bit of levity? Does it need to be easily digested, like maybe a out of home, like a billboard or something like that? And then where, when, how will your writing be distributed? Is it going to be across multiple channels? So does it need to be a bit more broad? Is it online only? So you want to make sure that it's concise and gets their attention. Does it have visuals, or does it need to be extra compelling if it's only a written text? All of these things are important to consider. All right, so we kind of touched on this, but kind of going back to your audience, identifying your target audience for this key message. Just think about how we read on a regular basis. So we're going to take just a little bit of a deep dive here and think about how readers' eyes move over text, the world of typography. So we're not going to get too deep into this, but we all like narrow columns, 8 to 12 words per line, 50 to 75 words in a section. We want to break up long paragraphs. We want to suggest subheadlines so that it's not quite so overwhelming if somebody were to look at one body of work. Some text formatting tricks that could guide the reader how you want, like maybe using some bold formatting, maybe pull quotes, calls to action, maybe some captions or sidebars. The biggest thing is to break it into small bites, especially in today's day and age, excuse me, when many of us are on social media a lot. We're always looking for the next thing, and we need it to be in bite-sized pieces. There could be numbered points, printed pages, web pages, and we all think about reading kind of top down, and in English, we read from left to right. So we only have a few seconds really to capture the audience's attention. So if we bury the lead, as journalists say, there's a good chance that our readers might even give up and move on before they get to the good stuff. All right, so consider the audience language preferences. Is it high context, or does it need to be low context? So for high context, it's emotionally loaded, it's shorthand, it requires some knowledge. Think of it this way, is that you've already had a conversation or multiple conversations with your audience before this next piece comes out. And it's going to reach a more targeted audience. It's a little more risky, but it can be really effective. It's good for reaching subcultures, saying a lot in just a few words, great for advocacy, but not so good for writing that crosses cultural boundaries. So think kind of about high context or low context. For low context, it's more emotionally muted. It's available to all. It reaches a lot of people. It's a way to communicate broadly. And that ensures understanding. And in that way, the writer maintains control and is less likely to offend. All right. And then just be mindful of the contextual relevance, and don't forget to align with what we understand about our audience, what they want, what they need, and then what we can provide for them. All right, so here's 3 tips for writing with impact. 1, write short. It's critical to capture your audience's attention immediately. Think about YouTube. YouTube viewers only watch about 15 seconds or less before they decide to watch the whole video or to move on. It's very short. And then write clear. This ensures that your message is easily to digest. You don't want it to be confusing. You don't want it to be too much fluff. And again, it'll depend on the channel and the medium, but you want to think through that as well. And then write. Avoid distractions and do your best to stay on point. Don't just accidentally distract the reader. So then we want to think about whether all of this together is understandable, engaging, relevant, actionable. So from an understandable point, that's going to be the language you use. From the engaging perspective, that's whether it's visually, whether it relates, is it relatable to either culture or your audience that you know and love? Is it relevant? So think about the position that they're taking with the communication that you're providing. And then is it actionable? Is it something that they're going to be able to either scan the QR code and go right to what you're talking about? Or is it something that is more of an awareness piece? All right, so in slide 7, we're going to look over effective communication strategies. But first, we're going to define what strategic communication is. And that's purposeful use of communication to achieve a goal or objective. So again, thinking back through what we talked about, right off the bat was thinking about our business goals and our objectives and understanding how to incorporate those goals into our writing so that the writing supports those goals, if that makes sense. It's also just a key component of building your organization's reputation, and it can definitely be attributed to your overall performance. So now that we've got that, the groundwork laid there, let's talk about some foundations of effective communication. So one, active listening. It's good to, and you can practice this just in conversations amongst colleagues, your friends and family. Listen not just to respond, but to comprehend. I think we all probably can relate to those people in our lives, whether it's family or friends or colleagues, where you're telling either a story or you're talking about something important, and you can see them kind of just ready to respond, and they're not actually listening. That can be frustrating, right? So it's something that's really important to just be mindful of, so that as somebody is speaking, you're processing to be able to respond more authentically and more meaningfully. And you can also show engagement through eye contact, nodding. This is more in person, or it could be through Zoom. And then any reflective feedback. It sounds like you're saying this. I have a friend of mine who works in PR, and she's always so good about when we talk about a specific either need or even just anything in general with PR and marketing. She's very good about saying, I understand, or copy, or you're heard, I understand what you're saying. And that just, even though it sounds kind of silly, I feel like you can't over communicate that, because it's just in a world where things are so busy and there's so much noise. It's good to know that somebody is actually listening. All right. And the next foundation is empathy. Step into your audience's shoes to be able to connect emotionally or intellectually. Have they been through something really hard lately? I know that here in Western North Carolina, when we had just got through Hurricane Helene, and I'm sure all of you across the state have had impacts from storms and things like that. But you could just see the empathy in all the communication, whether it was social media, whether it was emails, even just like when you hadn't seen, like I ran into a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in probably 6 or 8 months. And the first thing I did was just like, how are you? Like, are you okay? That was kind of one of those things, knowing that everybody had been impacted by that. So just kind of showing that empathy. So that's always really important. And then clarity, avoid jargon unless that's the only way people speak, or overly complex sentences. Always good to break down those thoughts into clear, logical pieces. And then adaptability. Be flexible in how you approach different cultures, different situations, different personalities. If you're addressing maybe town leadership, you want to be professional, or if it's your clients, until you get to know them a little bit better, it's always good to start off with that professional tone. And then if it's more peers or social media, it can be a little bit more friendly, a little more casual, and that way it feels more like a conversation. All right, so breaking tradition for creativity. So why should we do this? Well, it's to stand out above all the noise. There's so much going on today, whether it's through our different social media feeds, whether it's through email, whether it's just, people in passing. So to be able to stand out above everything else that's going on, it's really important to be creative. It also helps to outperform the competition. You're maybe doing something that's not people are not as prepared for it. It gets their attention, and they want to know why, and they want to be able to engage with that. So capturing your audience's attention when maybe things were either getting stale or it was starting to feel repetitive. And then when should you use it? Well, especially among highly competitive channels like press releases. You think about sending out a mass press release to a group of, say, 300 media contacts. And if they're receiving 100 of those a day, what is it that you can do to be able to stand out among all the other ones? Or maybe should you kind of bring in that list to something that's going to be a bit more relevant to them and still be creative so you get a much higher engagement rate? And then think about social media as well. And then, of course, paid advertising, because it's such a balance to try to find the right balance between, enough advertisers so that the organization can stay in business, but not too many that things are getting lost. All right, let's look at some actionable writing strategies. So, one thing you can do on the creative side and to get their attention is to, subvert expectations. It's the idea of ethically misleading. Again, ethically, to capture their attention, maybe thinking it's going one way and then all of a sudden it goes a different way in the story or in what you're offering. I think a couple of years ago or several years ago now, REI became pretty well known for sort of going against the Black Friday sale, right? So they decided that instead of being open on Black Friday, they were going to close down on Black Friday and encourage everybody to go outside, which I still think is fantastic. And I think we've seen Black Friday change over the years, but I just thought that was a really great campaign, and they wanted the outdoors to feel like it was for everyone. And so to take a day off from shopping, take a day off from like our phones, and just go outside. And by the way, they're going to close down on Black Friday, which, I mean, think about how much money they could have made if they had stayed open. But that's who they are, and they thought they'd lead with that. Pretty creative. You can start in the middle of the action. So there's, you're jumping right into it to get their attention. You want to make it personal for your audience. Less is more. This is usually really pretty true, especially with writing these days, that you want to trim it down. You could even, like with some of these additional tips, delete the first sentence. I know sometimes I've written things out and I'm like, you know what? I think I say that in the rest of the body, so I'm going to take up the first paragraph because now it's more to the point. And then going back up to number 5, don't be coy, just get right into it. Some additional tips for writing. You can also just read it out loud. Sometimes saying it out loud, you're like, oh, that's not at all what I meant. Or have a conversation with a colleague or a friend, or just somebody that's like a sounding board to hear what it sounds like and have them give you some feedback. You could also, here's one technique, is just to be outlandish or exaggerate how you say things, so you can get a feel for how it's gonna come across. And then just getting in quickly, make that impression, and do it in a way that feels true and honest. And then you also want to cut out words, of redundancy. You want to make sure that, you don't want to skip over important details, but you want to be able to make it concise. All right, so now you're trying to figure out how to find your voice. So think about from a branding perspective, right? You're trying to make sure that your personality comes through. Well, if you get to a point where you feel like you're just not able to do anything else, take a break. I know for me, just walking outside for 15, 20 minutes, I do some of my best thinking when I'm outside. And a lot of people say you do your best thinking when you're in the shower. Seems like it's a very safe place that you have to be in where you do some of your best thinking. And then again, say it out loud and write for a person, not a population. This is basically saying that sometimes when you cast a wide net, it can just keep going and nobody catches it. So, write for either a specific group or a specific niche, or maybe a person. And then stick to one idea at a time. I know sometimes I get excited and I start wanting to put it all together, and then it's just too confusing. Combine similar topics so that if you do have things that really kind of would work better together, put those together so that it's more concise, and then use the same grammar that your audience uses. All right, right. So it's really important, and I know I do this a lot. I have to remind myself that when you're writing, you want to be more active and not so much like passive. And you want to use active verbs like run, walk, eat, speak, explore, climb, versus stative verbs that are more, have or like or seem. That just seems less confident. And then, like I said, use more active forms. Not the news has been reported or the painting was created, but here's what's happening now. Be in the present. or the future, but not the past. Talk about you and not they, so it feels like it's more of a conversation between you and your audience. And then keep it short so that attention is there. Couple additional tips to use sentence rhythm. Use your ears so you can hear it, make sure it sounds okay. And then keep them simple. And that repetition of, of a specific tone will help keep that rhythm and keep your audience engaged. All right, so as we bring it back together, one of the things that I would say when I go to write something, if I need to just sit down to write something, I wouldn't say that everything I put together is inspirational, but I want my audience to feel something. That's my ultimate goal. So whether my business goal is to, make people want to go to my website and more clicks, if it's to get more engagement on social media, if it's to get more attendance at a specific event, I want them to feel something by what I put together. And then let your brand's personality shine. I think that's something that's so important. And I think today it's more true than ever that, brands have personalities. They might be humorous or they might be just direct and to the point, depending on what type of business it is. They might be, acting as an expert or offering tips or helpful or whatever it might be. So sometimes I'll even write down some adjectives of my brand's personality so that as I'm going through what I'm writing, it comes out in there. And then read. This is a good one and something I have to remind myself of. Just read things, whether it's good stuff, bad stuff. It just helps you to be able to analyze what you're doing and make sure that what you're putting together is going to be effective. And then read things out loud. I know I've mentioned that a couple of times, but it's important to make sure that what you're writing, you can listen to it so that you can hear how others might say it. Because you don't know whether they're going to read quietly, if they have an app that's going to read it to them, or they're going to read it out loud to somebody else. So all of that, very important stuff. All right, so we made it to the end. Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate y'all coming. Next week on the 3rd, we're going to get into some more specifics about media relations. Media relations mistakes to avoid. I know I've been there. I've definitely made some mistakes. I'm like, oh, that was terrible. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to navigate the nuances of media relations and what mistakes to avoid. And so basically how to use media relations the right way. And we'll even get into a little bit of the difference between public relations and media relations and then how they're related as well. Because a lot of times people will use those terms interchangeably and they are not the same. So I won't give it all away, but that's kind of what we have going on for next week. And if there's any questions or anything else, I will certainly stick around and answer those or, be here if anybody has any other comments or discussion.